Happy Friday! Welcome to another episode of Rabble Rants Live. My name is Jessa. I'm normally the host of Blueprints of Disruption. Together, I host this with Joe. Say hello, Joe.
Hello. How
How
you
you
guys all
doing this?
doing?
I hear
I'm
you're going to
doing
be up to
good.
mischief this weekend. You don't have to tell us about it here, but
A little bit, a little bit. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of activity going on around Ottawa, so I'm always keeping an eye out and sometimes I get involved.
are you going to share some in the updates when we get there?
Not so much of anything going on, but there is one that was a really, really good update, which I think you might have seen that we'll be discussing a little bit later for sure.
Okay, awesome. Also joining us is our special guest for this week. He's going to rant alongside of us, unpack the headlines from across Turtle Island that mostly relate back to the movements that we talk about on Blueprints of Disruption. And Chris actually is going to be in an upcoming episode of Blueprints. We talked about controlled opposition, also known as the NDP. Anyway, it's a broader discussion than that. But Chris, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I was the interim leader of the New Brunswick NDP 2020-2021. I've worked pretty closely with organizations here in New Brunswick. The New Brunswick Media Co-op, I do some editing for them. I do a lot of photos and stuff for them if they need stuff in Fredericton. I just try and add value to whatever people are already doing when I'm not doing something on my own, which is what I recommend everyone else figure out a way to do. You don't have to agree with everything, just help them do it anyway.
No, absolutely. You don't have to start from scratch. There's people who need help with sometimes the most mundane things you don't even think would be helpful, and they're dying to find somebody who's willing to, maybe do some data entry or editing. But no, welcome, Chris. It'll be interesting to get a East Coast perspective on some of the things. Some of the things we talk about are kind of Ontario, but they always have broader implications. So I'm sure you'll have 2 cents on that. But let's tell the audience, we'll tease them a little bit of what we're going to talk about. A lot of police state items. Like, we didn't purposely cultivate it like this, but it just so happened. I guess those were the things that had us most riled up, but there was no shortage of it. And for some reason, I know I just thought of another one that is missing from my show notes, so I'll be sure to add that. But a prominent Canadian journalist was arrested in Montreal. We're definitely going to talk about Eves. And there's a show, kind of like ours, over in Alberta that's been shut down by a slap suit, essentially. We're going to break that down. Notorious convoyer. I don't know, is that a term? Pat
Sure.
King. Sure, we don't care. We have other words for them, but he was sentenced in an Ontario court this week. What do we think about that? Our feelings get complicated, right? They're a little complicated, but we'll get there. Always time to shit on conservatives. This week we're going to talk about their unwillingness to answer questions, whether that's in a debate or facing the media, and the tactics that they're employing in the elections and leading up to them. Also, there was a historic agreement signed by so-called Canada and the Haida Nation, and that has not only big implications for, reconciliation and Indigenous rights, but it's rooted in disruption and resistance. They didn't just get there by asking nicely. And so we'll talk about that. And if we make time, we've got a few other headlines that might make the gamut, but our second half of the show is always Disruptive Updates. And that's where we share folks who are busting down doors, the status quo, and challenging capitalism, from coast to coast, sometimes beyond. And we love to share victories or calls to action. So make sure you stay tuned to the second half of the show for that. But and then at the end, I forgot, our third segment is we provide tips for activists. So 2 weeks ago, it was what to do when you would get arrested. Last week, we covered wheat pasting, how to make your own glue to poster, real kind of entry-level grassroots participation. So stay tuned for this week's tip of the week. So so many arrests, so little time. Really feeling the pinch of the Canadian police state this week. And I think yesterday, the drama unfolded 2 days ago with Eve Ongler. We've talked about I was trying to look through and see if I've ever had him on the show. I can't believe we didn't. Maybe I'm missing an episode, but we intended to have him on when we brought Dimitri Lascaris on to talk about how they were disrupting the lives of MPs in Ottawa mercilessly, stalking. Well, I shouldn't use that language, I guess, but considering the predicament he's in right now. But yeah. You may have seen his videos on social media of him confronting politicians, going to arms industry events. He finds politicians everywhere they go and confronts them with, the questions that we want answered on Palestine in particular. But he did not cut his teeth on this. Eve has written books, and he's prolific, a journalist in terms of exposing Canada's imperialist agendas, and I imagine it's been a real thorn in the side of the state. And this is one way they're getting back at him. So Montreal police have arrested him. I'm not sure of his status at this very moment because he was trying to wait out bail conditions. And we talk a lot about bail conditions on this show and how the state uses them to silence folks. But what he's been charged with, I think, is the craziest part of it.
I've got the video if we want to watch that first.
Yeah, let's hear from Eve directly. Right, this is right before he was going to turn himself in to the Montreal police.
I'm going to be arrested for social media posts criticizing Israel, and specifically criticizing a génocidaire, Dalia Kurtz, who wants to see more Palestinian blood spilled. And after I publicized the fact that I was being charged for social media posts criticizing Israel, the police have responded by saying I'm harassing the police. So initially, I'm supposedly harassing a génocidaire for social media posts criticizing Israel. And then when I write about the fact that I'm being charged for criticizing Israel, the police are now saying they feel harassed. And a police investigator has actually brought in 4 different charges of harassment, intimidation, entrave, I guess interference, against me on the grounds that I wrote about the fact that I was being charged for social media posts criticizing Israel. And this is, I think, a pretty flagrant abuse of the state authority on behalf of those promoting Israel's crimes. This is obviously an attack against freedom of expression, but really what it is a use of the policing and legal system to target someone that opposes the Canadian government's complicity in a genocidal rampage by Israel that's left at least 100,000 people dead, killed in Gaza, destroyed most buildings, destroyed most agricultural land. Even if Israel just stopped tomorrow, people will be dying for years and years because of all the unexploded ordnance, because of all the chemical pollutants, the asbestos, all the other things that they've released into the toxic environment that is Gaza. And of course, we know that the Israeli government is actually trying to restart its ethnic cleansing and genocide campaign. So it's an absolute outrage that the Montreal police would put the powers of the state at the service of those who are doing everything they can to enable Israel to kill more and more and more Palestinians. So today, from what I understand, I'm going to go in there. They're going to try to put some conditions. They haven't made it clear what the conditions are. Initially, the initial condition was that I don't talk about the case. So I don't talk about the fact that I'm being charged for social media posts criticizing Israel. We'll see if they try to continue with that. We actually have a legal judgment, very clear legal judgment, saying that's absolutely unconstitutional. Whether the police continue with that, I don't know at this point. The police officer yesterday told me they would detain me until I see a judge. He said it would be overnight. I've heard conflicting things on that. It might be 6 hours. It might be till tomorrow morning. Obviously, any any minute of time that myself, all of you that are here to come down, thanks a lot for coming down. All of all this time is sucking resources away from the work we have to do to stop the Canadian government from enabling Israel's crimes. And this is what the Canadian government and Zionist forces across the country have been doing. They've been using the police system, they've used the legal system to basically suck up the resources of a grassroots popular uprising against the Canadian government's complicity in Israel's Holocaust. So it's a real shame on the Montreal police to have joined in this. I don't believe any of these charges will. I believe that the Crown will ultimately just drop the charges, and it certainly, if it came before a judge, the judge will just drop it. It's a joke. I'm a father of a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. I've written 13 books. I'm not a threat to Dahlia Kurtz. I've never met Dahlia Kurtz. I've never talked to Dahlia Kurtz. I've never messaged Dahlia Kurtz. The police officer told me Dahlia Kurtz lives in Toronto. I mean, it's a comedy. But this is what the police investigators have decided to move forward with. And I think the context of them moving forward with it is this onslaught of Zionist groups claiming that, you know, Jewish Canadians are under threat. It's a danger. The mob, the pro-Palestinian mob, the deport them all, like Dahlia Kurtz goes on and on. This anti-Palestinian racism, this Islamophobia that is being pushed all over. This is the context of which the Montreal police investigator responds by following through on Dahlia Kurtz. And I should also say that Dahlia Kurtz, as the investigator told me initially, the initial investigator, that it's a legal firm. So she didn't bring it, just charge for it herself. It was a legal firm, and apparently it's the law firm of Neil Oberman, who's been launching injunctions against Palestine groups for months now, many against McGill. The encampment at McGill is the most well-known one. And so it's him that prepared this case. It goes back like 5 months, according to the police investigator. I don't know why they decided to move 2 days ago on this, but it's a coordinated attack. So it's a threat to freedom of expression, and most importantly, it's a threat to those who don't want our government to enable, to support, to assist, to finance, to arm Israel's genocidal onslaught against Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank and more generally. Palestine.
Oh, man. So when he was accused of harassing the police, he referenced 2,500 letters have been sent. You can see here that is up to 6,500 letters have been sent to Montreal police. I'm sure they've gotten quite a few phone calls. I imagine that law firm is also getting contacted, and it should be, may I say. And I will say, in the comments there, I've put a link to this particular letter writing campaign that Eves himself has asked people to sign on to. And I think it's just, from a rabble rouser's perspective, that's kind of like the take that we try to provide is there's a couple things. Eve's standing there wondering why now. We've found that quite often police will line up charges, sometimes months after the incident, and their timing is usually strategic in itself. So they either are anticipating that you yourself are going to participate in something larger, or it serves as a distraction from something else. But in Toronto, they've seen, before significant dates of resistance, anniversaries or marked escalations in the movement, they would round up a bunch of organizers for, say, a sit-in that had happened 6 months earlier. And it does two things. It puts you kind of out of commission for a key period of time. And it also haunts your colleagues in the way that you never know if you're going to get picked up. You did something, you didn't get arrested, cops know it was you, you were there, and months go by and you think, am I good? Am I not good? I see these people getting arrested months after the fact, and so you're always on edge, wondering if you're about to be picked up. So it has this eerie effect on, or its attempt to have a kind of silencing attempt on the...
There's more to Eve right now. I've got to follow up in regards from a post from Alex Tyrrell. He was there reporting on the court while Eve was being arrested. So
This
that
is the leader of
afternoon,
the Green Party in Quebec.
correct. So that afternoon, 2:45, Eve Engler appeared in court via video link on charges related to his criticisms of a Zionist media personality. The Crown opposed his release without providing a reason. A bail hearing was set for tomorrow, meaning he will spend the night in jail. Engler appeared without his glasses, struggling to see the screen. When he was asked if he had legal representation, he confirmed that he's represented by lawyer John Philpott, but was then cut off mid-sentence when attempting to discuss his conditions. When he was asked why his release was opposed, the judge dismissed his question, saying it was a prosecutor's discretion and advised him not to speak. A not guilty plea was recorded. Then Eve tried to ask about his political rights. The judge cut him off again, and he was quickly led out of the room. So he was denied release right away and was forced to go bail, which means he's obviously, now this is slightly different since this is in Quebec, and therefore it's under civil law, not common law that we do in Ontario. But he's going to be, they clearly want to put conditions on him. So I'm assuming we're going to hear about this later on today as to what conditions were imposed on him. And this is what they do all the time. This is part of the pattern I've seen everywhere.
Absolutely. He mentioned the use of injunctions. Like, we'll talk about a little bit about injunctions when we get to the court ruling against the RCMP later. But yeah, it's incredible the impact that these injunctions have on your charter rights, your democratic rights. And I think like a lot of journalists out there are just looking at this case. We've seen typical arrests, at protests. They all are problematic. We have issues with them and the criminalization of protests, and that's another issue. But this is simply typing. Like, he called her a supporter of genocide. You hear him call her genocider, right? But a supporter of genocide and a fascist. Those are the claims that are made against him. Like, I do that all day, every day. Yep. For a lot of people, systems, people, those are claims I make a lot. A lot of us do online. This particular personality that he's accused of harassing could have blocked him on Twitter. Eves makes this point. Like, he doesn't follow her. It's X that promotes her shit on his timeline, and he is responding to it. She then quote tweets him, so she's going after him, and she could easily block. Like, there is a function there. So, like, beyond it being a tool of the Israeli state, they're absurd even on its, if you took all that away, right? If you just looked at it from a harassment point of view, it's not even. So it's like such a stretch. The masks just keep falling, right? When they do absurd abuses of power like this, it's just, even your average person is like, what the fuck?
If this was anything else, this should be, at best, a civil case. So, being sued for either libel or harassment, regards to some sort of, maybe there's a peace bond that's in there. This should not be in the hands of criminal. There's nothing, like to get to that point where it's criminal harassment. There's a significant threshold, and it's going to be on the Crown to try to prove that. And I think they're I don't think they care. I think they just want, for some reason they got these instructions to do this and to cause this, and this is going to be interesting to watch, because come today, the Crown is going to come in, and I'm calling it right now, they're going to put in conditions. They're going to ask him for conditions saying he's going to be released, but he's got to do this, some of the standard ones, no weapons, no contact with Dahlia, but they're also going to say no talking about Palestine, no talking about Israel, no, and this is the ones you need to watch that they're going to be asking for, because this is what they do. They try to silence and intimidate, and the idea is not just to silence him, but also intimidate people who follow him in trying to silence them.
So, I know I told you that I door knocked for the Liberals, I got an even worse one for you here. I
was going to add that out. I thought
in a police family. I grew up in a police family, a military police family, no less.
You got an angle on this.
I'm sorry, I didn't know this about him before I brought him in the studio. No, I did.
He's a tough guy, so he doesn't care what I say. My father's one of the lead criminal investigators for the military police in the country. I know how criminal investigations operate because I watched him complain about work his whole life. They don't do things without being sure. So if they're doing something without being sure, it's because they have another goal in mind. They don't just throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks. I promise you, the professionals are much better at their jobs than that. Once they have you, they know they have you. So the goal here is to try and get them to sign something to say, no, I won't talk about this stuff anymore. It's terrifying if you think about the implications of that. It really is. But I can say without a doubt, this isn't just the police acting randomly. He's part of some sort of operation right now that's going on. And
we have a name for it. Yeah, like it's a different world though here. Like it defies logic, a lot of the things that the police are doing right now, and a lot of it has to do with the hate crimes working group that operates out of at least in Ontario, out of the Ontario Attorney General's office. But this is being replicated at all levels of government, where there is a concerted effort to persecute and prosecute Palestinian solidarity. And most charges are being dropped. Like we interviewed movement lawyers, I think 3 weeks ago now, the episode, and it was very common for charges to be dropped. And a lot of it is, like both of you mentioned, is in those conditions, the silencing, but sometimes just the punishment of process. I think that's the name of the episode. That's the term the lawyer used, that, getting arrested, getting doxxed, right? Because it all comes with Eves doesn't, he's out there already, but most activists aren't, right? So your name goes out there, your personal information, then you get doxxed even further than that, and then you get harassed, and then you have to weigh yourself down by getting a lawyer and meeting all those bail conditions and being stressed out about whether you're going to breach those bail conditions. And then some of the bail conditions actually take you right out of the game altogether. So they're able to and then this can stretch on for a long, long time with the state that our courts are in. And there is no repercussions for police or these investigators that, come to the conclusion that there's legitimate reason to charge these people, that they're completely backed up by the crowns here going, yeah, don't worry. Yep. Yeah. Like this is just part of the process of intimidating and criminalizing, even if it's just in the minds of everybody else. So that's why, like, we're, on the agenda here next is talking about Pat King. And like the first thing that I say, and I knew I would say it, it's not like I was just biting my lip to see if he would be sentenced, to make sure, like, we don't cheer on that shit. We don't cheer on the convoy. That's not what I mean. Like, you don't do that either. But like, don't cheer on that police state response that has people convicted and facing jail over, occupying a street. Right? Causing mischief, not listening to cops. So, it's like you're feeding into the same mentality that has Eves arrested, that has, what are we at? Like, it's a while since I've gotten an update from my friends, but we were well over 100 arrested in Toronto for Palestinian solidarity work. And like, doing things we encourage you folks to do in every episode. Nothing we terrible.
Yeah. We've got a significant amount here in Ottawa. It's not quite 100, but we have at least 10 to 15 that's been arrested. Some of them still holding on charges, and a few still in jail.
There was a very shortly after the attacks in October, there was a solidarity protest here in Fredericton, I was taking photos for the media co-op. And I knew nothing about the organizing of the event. Like, I'm there in solidarity, but primarily I'm there kind of doing a job, like, and the police come right up to me. I don't know if they just thought I was charismatic enough that I must be part of organizing it, and they go, "Are you organizing this?" And they're trying to be right friendly, but again, I know enough about the police to know, oh no, definitely not. Do you know who organized it? Haven't a clue. I know, but they're walking right through the crowds, and I mean, in Fredericton, you protest, you won't see the police other than maybe in a car on the road far away, but they won't be with you. That was the only time I ever saw the police walk in the crowd. Only time, and I've been to 50 protests in Fredericton.
Trying to identify the players.
Yeah. Like, it's real stuff. You don't have to be paranoid. It's real. Like, it's if you believe what you say about your country, that it's a modern police state, that we live in like a corporate fascist state, then these things happen. It's not some conspiracy. I promise you, they happen. They do it when they target someone. They go after you. They make it your thing. Usually, they're trying to intimidate you. The best defense is to not be able to be intimidated. Usually, they don't go after lawyers as much and stuff. But yeah.
Well, Eves has, the pressures that are on him are incredible, and what he does is up to him, but he has stated that he won't sign conditions that won't allow him to speak about Palestine or his case about the police charging him, right? But because he's a journalist and he lives for this, right? He lives to expose the Canadian state for what it is. He has agreed to not contact Dahlia. He's like, I have no problem signing conditions like that. Like, she is not even on my radar kind of deal. So we'll have to stay tuned, and you can bet your bottom dollar we'll be following this case and, asking Eves if he can come into the studio to talk about it when he can. But on the same day that he was notified of arrest, so like we knew arrest was pending, Anna Lippman was arrested in the West Bank. Who is Anna Lippman? You have not been watching my show. She has been a guest like 4 or 5 times. She is with Independent Jewish Voices. She is with Labor for Palestine. Jews Say No to Genocide. This is not even her first or second time to the West Bank. She does protective presence there, which means, Westerners, Jewish, who are able to get there quite easily because of the privilege that they hold and stay within the villages within the West Bank that are under bombardment from the Israeli settlers. And the hopes is that, they observe, they record, they are just there. And, the term is not, it's a human shield to a degree, because it would look so horrible should something happen to one of them. But also it's just like, we are watching kind of mentality as well. And she was videotaping Israeli soldiers who were investigating a arson. The settlers had come in the middle of the night and set fire to one of the vehicles of the Palestinian villagers, and they were investigating it in the morning. By investigating, I mean they were standing there with a flashlight and doing nothing. Anyway, and they took her passport, looked at it, and then they hauled her away. They wanted to ban her from the entire occupied territories, and she is still there as far as I know. She was trying to appeal those conditions. So the Canadian state, the Israeli state, they all using the same fucking tactics. It's, their police help train our police. So it's no wonder we see such similarities. But it was a day for me. I was really pissed off, like, we're lucky we didn't go live that day, because I probably wouldn't have been all that cohesive. I was just to see so many folks, like good people fighting the good fight, getting hauled around by cops, and just, knowing all the implications there are for them. But, it's hard for me to really feel bad about Pat King. Let's talk about Pat King's sentencing now. because for me, it's a very similar discussion. I mean, I don't want people to be able to, I don't want people hearing his shit. You know what I mean? I would love to duct tape his mouth and hide him somewhere, and like, and we don't ever have to worry about him, you know? Like, but that's not the world we live in, and we always have to be careful. There's so many examples of this, of where our enemies are confronted by something, and then we find ourselves cheering on a narrative that we would never want used against us. And like the Convoy gave us so many of those examples. The use of the Emergency Act. I mean, we didn't come here to talk about that, but that's the same thing. It's like, oh, the protests get out of hand. Well, you know, let's just invoke the Emergency Act and clear it. Because like the cops really didn't give a shit about the individual assaults that were happening on queer folks and all the other kind of hate crimes that were occurring. They were just, it was the disruptive act of it. And so, you know, I haven't been following this so much, so Joe's going to update us on what exactly happened and who Pat King is, because, you know, so hopefully not everybody knows.
That's true. So Pat King, for those who aren't aware, is one of the leaders of the Convoy. One of several others. There's two others that are also still waiting to have the verdicts to their trial, and they were considered to actually be the main leaders, and that's Chris Barber and Tamara Litch, who should be getting their verdict, I believe, next month. So we'll probably have another update in regards to theirs. Now, Pat King was one of the other vocal ones, and one a particular leader that a lot of people watched because he already had a history when he joined the Convoy, particularly one that also included a lot of conspiracies from the Great Reset, and the global replacement, all, you know, and a couple of other anti-Semitic tropes and other Islamophobic tropes that he continues to peddle. So during that time, during the Convoy, he also did a lot of messaging, including telling people, you know, mocking people in Ottawa that were suffering because the horns were constantly hammering for 3 weeks, as well as telling people to keep hammering onto the horns, and telling people just to continue to ignore the court orders. Because of all that, he was charged with a total of 9 charges, and of those, 5 of them were he was found guilty on 5, and I'm just going to read them. The 5 charges that he was found guilty on was mischief, counseling to commit mischief, counseling to obstruct peace or peace officer, and 2 counts of disobeying a court order. Those being the court order to say not to use the horns, and he's telling people to continue to use the horns. So some of those are. So these are where it gets.
These are all things that like we could easily be charged with.
It is, and so yeah. So his sentence that he got was a total of 3 months of house arrest plus 12 months of probation. Now it's actually 12 months of house arrest, but he's got 9 months off because of time served, having been he was detained for about roughly 5 months, and of those, 30 days were in lockdown. So they actually add more time because when days are in lockdown, because the overcapacity of the Ontario system, we have a lot more lockdowns going on within the particular OCDC, as well as quite a few of the other detention centers in Ontario. That's a whole different discussion that I can have with anybody, and I will not stop ranting about. But that, I digress. So he still has those. One of the charges that he was not found guilty of, which I thought was kind of an interesting one, which was disruption, as well as counsel disruption. And this one is an important one. And the reason why I want to look over, especially Pat King's, is the different aspects of Pat King's both trial, from bail to trial to everything else, is being used when the Crown wants to charge people in Ontario as precedents. Particularly, I've seen a lot of people in regards to the Palestinian movements where they're actually denying social media, and they're using Pat King's denial of social media as precedents for that. Now,
he needed better lawyers for our sake at the beginning, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, like,
absolutely.
I hate where the state has us cheering for actors like this. Like, you're not cheering for him as a person, but you're like, Jesus, don't set precedents like that.
Yeah. So there is hopefully some good precedence in regards to this, and this is a particular one because again I've seen this one in regards for Ontario. They, I know in Ottawa they've done a couple of charges like this where they were saying like you were protesting on a road and therefore that's mischief, and we're going to arrest you and charge you with mischief. While Judge Hacklin, who was when he was determining Pat King's sentence, his convictions. One of the convictions was the disturbance of the peace, and Judge Hacklin said obstructing a highway in context of an of otherwise lawful protest against government policy should not be interpreted as intimidation, even if, as it is present case, it constitutes or involves mischief. To do so would be an unduly broad interpretation of Section 423, as it would capture a broad range of lawful protests against government actions, in which there is no proven intent to intimidate individuals. Stated otherwise, the specific intent offense of intimidation is not made out in the circumstances of this case, notwithstanding mischief may have occurred when a highway is obstructed in the course of a protest. Now, more importantly, oops, where's my mouse? Sorry, I see the mouse on the screen and it's not the right one. Oof. This additional particular point was huge for me, which was protest by its very nature is meant to cause some level of disruption. If protesting is not disruptive, it would not be effective.
I feel like that's a shout out to our show. It's like, I've been
exactly
saying that all along, people.
Exactly.
It's not a parade. But another point in that language there that fuels me is intimidation of an individual. It seems to be like a green light. We are allowed to intimidate the state as an entity, like that's the whole point, to show your numbers and that you have power and you oppose whatever's happening. But as long as you're not directly threatening an individual. So I guess, sometimes they have very creative ways of displaying their discontent with leaders within a march, guillotines, or sometimes they're hanging off a stick, and, you've seen them.
Absolutely.
Perhaps you think of these loopholes within the law when you're protesting, but yeah, it is heartening to see the disruption charge. But, just the idea of cops come, they just tell you to stop making noise. And if you don't stop making noise, you can face this. Like, he's a piece of shit, but he spent all that time in lockdown for organizing a demonstration. We just don't agree with what he was demonstrating, and we don't agree with with what many of his followers did and said. But in the end, if you take it at his activities, we often share same intentions and same fucking frustrations, right? Like, we like to distance ourselves from the right all the time. Ideologically we are. But in the end, I mean, we can't just annex the other half of the working class or whoever the fuck is buying into this shit. They are obviously frustrated and angry and enough to have mobilized in that way. I would have loved for them to be aiming for something other than COVID vaccines and now migrants or trans kids. But the reality is, they did mobilize. They took risks. They did what we try to encourage people to do, disrupt the everyday, make the state respond, either by capitulating to your demands or by showing their face the way that they do, right? Showing themselves as fascists, authoritarians, with no tolerance for democracy, really. So that's the whole point. Living in Ottawa, I didn't live in Ottawa. I didn't live under siege in that way. So I guess it's difficult for me to see it from that perspective, right? I would be very angry if it was my town under siege by right wingers too. I get that part of it, but it sets patterns.
I was lucky to be on the outside of that. I am in Ottawa, but I was outside of the downtown core, who was very much affected strongly there. I knew quite a few people that were in the downtown. It was frustrating. And I will agree with people. by the 3 week mark, it was very clear that people were asking for things to be done, and it's true. Something needed to be done because this situation was getting out of hand. Things did need to be addressed, but everybody's kind of their solution to it. You ask the people in the convoy, like, well, all we needed to do was talk to Justin Trudeau. I'm like, that's cool, but we've seen it other videos where you guys try to talk to him, and that's not what happens. It's just endless yelling. And if they capitulated, then you also get into the whole, if the government capitulated, then you get into the whole thing. Well, if all it takes is just a bunch of trucks to show up, then we can literally demand anything at that point, because now we've given the template as to how to do that. So it gets kind of weird and complicated. As opposed to the charges and everything else going on, yeah, there's huge concern because now, as I said, these charges are now, or this template is now precedence as to any action. And we've seen it being done, particularly against Palestinians.
Yeah, a lot of people have been charged with disruption for blocking the road.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend who's watching the show message in. He said he was also in Ottawa, and he knows that someone at least kitted their truck with a train horn. So, yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, there's.
I'm sorry, that doesn't. That is creative.
Now, the issue is we talk about like protests being legal. We just talked about what happened with these. They're gonna get you if they want to get you, and if they don't want to get you, they're not gonna get you. And totalitarianism is real. This is where we are, and you have to do things that are effective first and foremost. But like, anytime we'd go protest at the legislature here in Fredericton, you have to get a permit to protest. I never get a permit to protest because I thought it would be really funny if they showed up and arrested the leader of a political party. We'd finally make it in the news. And you know what? They never did. And we show up with 40 people and someone would go, "You don't have a permit?" And I'd be like, "What?" They know that I'm telling them, "Come on, I dare you," and they're not going to fall for it. And sometimes you have to be willing to push stuff because first of all, your enemies control the laws. We're a majority parliamentary democracy. They can change the laws to be extraordinarily fascist tomorrow, even if you don't think they are today. So if they can't get you today legally, they can tomorrow, and the police will do it anyway. So if you and a group of people have something that's actually effective and you can organize it. Worry more about how you're going to treat your fellow people and whether it's morally correct, because the state is not the guideline for what's right and wrong. It can't be. And like even the legal code, like both civil and common law, are based on a lot of bullshit. So
the state doesn't even need to have the law. It doesn't even have to have the law to be able to ruin a lot of things for you. They can arrest you, charge you, and then hold you without bail. And even if all the charges are complete bullshit, they can still hold you without bail. And it's until you get to court. With the backlogs in Ontario, you're looking at least a year to 2 years.
That's why, for activists, it's just so critical for them to know where legal support is. And if you're organizing events, no matter how small or legal they appear, do not be advising those folks that don't worry, what we're doing is legal. There's no way the police are going to bother us. We have to be a little bit more realistic on how we prep people for actions at this point, right? Our activist tips are usually geared towards that. And this week's is for sure. And, yeah, because it's just like I said earlier, it's like a whole new world when it comes to what we'll be charged with, what is allowed for bail conditions, and next is sentencing or conviction. And I hope Pat King's case isn't like it will be that litmus test, but let's hope we have better lawyers in the movement to challenge some of these regardless. That requires so many resources, though. So if folks have the means and you're in Toronto or want to support people in Toronto, it's the Toronto Community Justice Fund. You can donate to that, and that helps not just legal support, like lawyers, but also the other things that folks get hit with when they're facing charges. They lose paid time at work or other things. They have to pay for childcare. It's endless, the inconveniences. But the good news is, and though it sounds daunting, there's not one person that I've spoken to across the movement that has said any of it has slowed them down, that any of them has even made them second guess what they're doing even for a second. In fact, it fuels them. And, you know, we did an episode, Solidarity and Supports Amid State Suppression, I think is what we called. And it was with the folks running the support groups, the legal support groups, and just the community that's created around people who are arrested, right? Like they become part of a family of sorts, and to lean on, to get resources from, to talk to connect to. And like, that's probably not everybody. It's kind of like a choice, but the efforts are there. And like when the police went in and tried to silence them and separate them and get them to sign conditions, they wouldn't organize with one another. You know, those were challenged, and the networks even grew. So it had the opposite effect. And just like with Eves, I imagine this is going to make him even angrier and more prone to talk about police abuse and the abuse of power that's happening. So, yeah, it's can be depressing. It's definitely getting you angry, but don't let it slow you down. And I wish I had queued up I have a speech. I should have tried to queue it up, and it's a famous quote, but I'm just going to paraphrase because I'll mess it up. But it's like, let's say you look at some of the more radical actions of some activists and you're just like not there yet. Or maybe you're just like, ooh, I don't know. I wouldn't behave like the Convoy behaved at all. You know, like that isn't how I want to get there. Just know you need to have people who are willing to do that, to take risks and be arrested. So if that's not you, just can you please prepare to support them? Like watch their kids while they're in prison, pay their bail, pay for their lawyer, you know.
Walk their dogs.
It's endless, the supports that you can give. The same way Chris was like, hey, I do whatever I can for whoever I can. It's like that includes folks that are facing arrest. So yeah, it's just how we have to grow as a movement to adapt to the police state. That's just one of the things. But let's change wheels a little bit and talk about conservatives. Not that we weren't already talking about conservatives, but Big C, PC in Ontario, progressive conservatives. I just hate calling them that because it's like, I'm not giving you that. You're not progressive for shit. And they're two contradicting terms, for fuck's sakes. How did that ever even happen? But I digress. What we're talking about is the conservative trend to just avoid answering all questions. So whether that's happening in press releases with Poilievre, or in Ontario, there is an election going on, in case you missed it, and they're just not showing up to debates. I pulled something here from the CBC, in the Sioux, but, the same is happening in Hamilton. The same is happening up here in the Simcoe County. I've seen endless posts from community groups who've gone through the trouble of holding these debates, a lot of environmentalist groups, and it's just like the Greens are showing up and the NDP. A lot of the Liberal candidates are paper candidates, so they're not around. But this is one of the flattest elections, I feel like, in a long time. It's just, but this trend isn't new at all. I ran in 2018 and 2019 against a conservative stronghold. And, he knew he had it in the bag. My MP is Scott Davidson. And in 2018, he came to all the debates and we smoked him. Like, the dude was just sitting there sweating the entire time. And they have binders. They're given binders with talking points, and like literally no matter what you ask them, they just have to pick one of these auto-generated talking points to respond to. Even sat with Carol Mulrooney once in her office, and we were like talking to her about raising the minimum wage, and like you have this impassioned plea with all this data and facts, and she had a list in front of her of like 7 bullet points, and she would just look down the list for real and like just say something. And it wouldn't even be related to what we were talking about. And the people there's like 3 of us in the office. We would just look at each other and be like, did that just happen? Like, is she talking about our gas bill when we are asking her to raise the minimum wage? And we'd come back at her and we'd have like this real great argument. And they would just look back to the list and say, we're just making life more affordable in other ways, you know? And it was just, this is how they campaign now. Just
They
pure
answer the
rhetoric.
question they want to answer.
Yeah, and you can't control that at a debate. So back to Scott Davidson, he came to the debates, but we found out that he was bugging the organizers for the questions in advance. So if I can't cherry pick the questions, I want to at least be able to prepare some fodder for an answer ahead of time. And I think folks had enough of that. The next time around, he just stopped coming. The only one he came to was the one organized by the Chamber of Commerce and all of his buddies, and the questions were entirely geared towards him. He still did really awful, like really, really, really awful, considering all the practice he'd had. But that is just like how they roll. And I confronted him at a community event. You know, we're serving spaghetti to residents, like campaigning. I hate that part of it. But I said to him, like, you know, where the fuck you been? He was such a bully on the campaign trail, too. Like, just such a bully, making fun of the Green candidate's weight to his face and saying, oh, what do you need? You don't have any signs? I'll pay for your signs. How much you need for your signs? I'll pay for your signs. You have to have signs. Like, he is such an asshole. And, you know, I'm going, you scared? You know, you scared to debate me again? And he's just like, oh, you know, they told us no more debates. And so
No, the answer
federally.
is yes. They are.
Yeah, because you can't answer to that.
That's what it is. They're top down. I mean, they're conservatives. Like, conservatism is a pretty top down ideology anywhere it shows up. So when they get a directive, they're bound to follow it. But the directive always shows up because they're scared. We live in the internet age. You can't just go into a closed room and lie to people as effectively anymore. That's what they do. That's all they can do. Nowadays, you need like the level of cognitive dissonance that's happening down in the States for it to ever even hold any water. You have to have your whole society basically end up like developing a mental condition. Like seriously. And it's a real issue for us to tackle because it's unlike anything people have ever dealt with. There's no left-wing hero, and there's a lot of them I look up to, wrote about the internet age 150 years ago. We don't know what to do, but that's a big part of why everything's so different now.
And I'm surprised at just how quickly the right has sort of adapted to it. This is not even limited to debate, as Jessa, you also put in this article here, in regards to Pierre, where not only are they just avoiding debates, they're controlling who's asking the questions at any PR event. Like right here, he's picked out, well, I'm just going to take 5 questions from 5, random media places like True North and Rebel News and Oxygen Canada and South Asian Daily and Radio Canada. That's it. A little bit of French in there for a spice because I have to. But yeah, they're controlling who's asking the questions, and at least 4 out of those 5 are given the softball questions.
Oh yeah, I checked out Oxygen Canada News. Like, what a random choice. Like, you go look, there's no viewers on any of their most recent videos. And they don't seem to be all that highly political. They just kind of tell it like it is. And it's entirely in Arabic. So, I mean, you can translate the page to see what they're talking about, but it just seems like they don't have that far of a reach. And if you were trying to have people hear what you have to say, you think you would try to spread it a little bit wider. But, I imagine he was able to set up what those questions would be with a couple of those outlets to give them that kind of access. Right? I think there was a little bit of likely a bit of quid pro quo going on there, because how did you get called out of all the 5 outlets, out of all the outlets that are there? Like these, same with the South Asian Daily. Like, I didn't check their viewership, but it's still got to be a much smaller demographic than, say, taking one from the Globe or the Post or whatever. And
exactly.
there's there's a video of Ford too. He's on a campaign trail. He's holding press conferences as well. He's in some factory and he's about to take questions and they cue music. And he's just like, "What? I can't hear you." And everyone, it's just, it's bordering on the absurd. And yeah, like I feel really bad for the small orgs that organize the debates, because like they want a chance to grill them, right? And have answers on very specific, usually local issues. And it's not like these people meet with you when they're in office either. So people have no access to democracy in a meaningful way other than just checking a box.
One of the biggest issues is that the reach of debates and stuff are kind of less important than they were in the past, because the way people get their media now is split up generationally. If you're young, you get it all via like 8-second ADHD clips, and if you're old, you watch the same TV you did when you were a kid. By and large, those are just the trends, and you can stick to those trends, so you can be sure that they're true. With these debates not actually happening, it's because the people who would benefit from them don't have the sort of leverage to say, no, these need to happen because like 40% of the population is just waiting to hear from us. Like, we can't not do it because no one cares. No one really, like, we care, but there's not enough people. Candidates need to find a way to like get these things on screens or advertised or something, or make it seem like a city event, town event that doesn't normally happen. I don't know, but you gotta like leverage them into it being more pressure, because that's why they're getting away with it, because it doesn't look good. It just doesn't look as bad as if they mess up. You can raise that scale and then convince them they're going to mess up.
And they're not getting too much blowback for not showing up either. Like, to your point, that's a hot mic moment is far more damaging than, I had to dig for that article in the CBC, complaining about the Sioux. The Hamilton Spectator, commented the fact that like all their debates seem to be void of cons, but there's nobody really reporting on the fact that it's a widespread practice. And I was on a call with a bunch of environmentalists in Ontario this week, and they were saying they could hardly see campaigns in any of their ridings. And some of these ridings are contested, It's like the PCs are just banking on getting back in and without having to do anything about it. But it's strange that like we're not able to create any more heat from them not being accountable. And that, to be said, debates were fun as a candidate, like a lot of fun. Because like, when else do you get to like go face to face with your ideological enemy? It's this class war for me, right? So like these are my enemies, all of them. And you get to look them in the face and ask them hard pointing questions, right? Because like, you don't have to just answer questions. Like, you put things on them and they have to answer or look foolish. Like, the lights are on them. Nobody might be watching it at home, but it's so satisfying. And nobody ever gets to do that to their representatives anymore. When we were talking to the communists, the Atlantic Regional Communists, I keep referencing their episode, and that's just a sign that it was a meaningful conversation. It percolates. But one of the things that they really wanted to add to their organization that they hadn't experienced is like encouraging open critique of power. Making a venue not just like, oh, you guys can call me anytime. Like, it's encouraged to bring people together and to kind of put your leaders on the hot seat on a regular basis. And that your leaders are accustomed, or whoever's responsible, you don't have to call them leaders, but whoever's like in that chair position, that director position, treasurer, like they are always expecting you to be questioning them and to holding them accountable. But in the partisan kind of sphere, typically in politics, like, you don't want to do that too much, not too openly. It's kind of like just cheer everybody on because there's another team to cheer against, and it's just not as meaningful, and you don't get growth out of that. And like, this is just another example of, not that it was ever a healthy democracy, but like the further demise of direct democracy. And yeah, it's just kind of being absorbed. Like, it's the liberals are even doing it. I put conservatives in the headlines because we like to shit on the right wing the most. But yeah, the liberals are kind of making a habit out of this. And I wouldn't be surprised if it just becomes like the norm to not really... Because look at the platforms over the years. It's a lot of rhetoric.
You win in debates. That's why you liked it, by the way. It's because we're used to losing so much, and that's when you just knock the pants off them. We had the same thing here in New Brunswick 2 provincial elections ago, Mackenzie Thompson. So that's the election we got less than 2% of the vote. So let's not kid ourselves about how that election went. But on the debate stage, it was the first time in 50, 60 years anyone went after the Irvings and McCains. And he basically just said that, like, everyone up here in some way promotes giving money to them, and trickle-down economics doesn't work, and all this stuff. And lo and behold, they don't want to host as many debates here in New Brunswick anymore, because New Brunswick kind of has a history of these pretty old school. Like, if you look at this debate, it was 5 years ago, and it looks like it was on TV in 1992. He's got his bow tie on. It's all grainy. It's some stuck at a time. But he goes right after him, and it's like, and I'm sure you said stuff that you didn't even realize was inflammatory to them as it was, because we think things every day that are just heretical. And then it comes out of our mouth, and then they go, oh no, this is what the people who are guarded say, because there are people way more radical than us who don't even try to engage with the system at all. Like, at some point, if you're trying to talk to people and engage with the system, there's some hermit out there who's given up completely. That's a little bit...
No. We need a party leader like that. Like, I would just... See, that's why these fucks appeal to people.
He was great.
Filters.
He was
like
great.
Trump doesn't have a filter, right? He talks like he probably talks normally, and folks, as disgusting as it is, they're like, oh, that feels real, right? Where politicians speak to you and you're like, I feel like I'm talking to a fucking robot. Like, what are you trying to say? It's like talking to a lawyer sometimes who's worried about something, like, it's just so calculated, and then your brain is just like, this isn't genuine. My lie radar just goes off, and I'm sure that's the same with everybody else. And it's just like, but when I would love to see a debate where, Ford actually shows up, and you've got a real off-the-cuff leader, NDP or whatever it ends up being, that's just tells it like it is, right? And uses our language, our anti-capitalist language, that it just doesn't give a fuck on how it might be pulled after. Or one point I didn't bring up in the episode we recorded yesterday, Chris, on controlled opposition, is that fear of red baiting. Like, they're afraid that they're going to be painted as commies if they actually speak the way we speak in convention and shit, like calling each other comrade and all of that. Like, it's just like, oh, no. They put up a Merritt Styles. It looks like is a banker's wife, and it's just like, talking in such sanitized language when all of us are just so mad as hell, right? We want to see that emulated. Yeah. American
Republicans call each other communists. You're not going to escape it. The Republicans in America routinely call each other communists. Everyone gets called a communist the moment try and, like...
They're calling Carney a communist.
Carney. See, like, how can you be worried about getting these labels when they have just become so ridiculous? But it's true. It's like, you don't want to...
It's better for us, by the way. Yep. That's good for us. That's good strategy-wise that they do this. They're going too far. They're, like, one of the leading things right now with what's going on with conservatives is people are thinking that it's got to the point where the newer generation of conservatives bought the propaganda from the older generation of conservatives. So they're not selling the propaganda, they're living the propaganda. There's a good chance like that's what's going on with the president of the United States, even though he's an old guy. Like, it's not that he's trying to sell people on it. He like truly believes it, and that's why it's different. Because like they're attacking the CIA. Like what are they doing? It's so weird. Like some stuff doesn't even make sense anymore because they're like theocrats. They're just Looney Tunes. It's off the wall, and it'll happen here in Canada in its own way. America pretty much cemented that we're not going to follow them ideologically completely because like there won't be enough popular support for a few years. But we will have our own fascism. Make no doubt, it's not coming. It's just going to shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
I think it'll be there, but it'll be a different version. I don't think our fascism will be us leading the thing. I keep thinking of us being more like in Italy in regards to joining another stronger one.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That didn't turn out very well over there.
Nope, it didn't. They got boots and hooks.
Who's putting stuff in the private chat here? I never even look at it. Sorry. I'm sorry if it was important, Chris.
It's no, it's okay. It's just a link to that Mackenzie thing I was telling you about. If either you wanted to take a look at it.
Oh yeah, no, I'll bookmark that for later for sure. Let's move on to another way of kind of not having to answer questions and silencing. And it seems to be a bit of a theme this week. Is the breakdown in Alberta. Like this was news to me today. I guess I hadn't been following it, but Joe was good enough to make sure that we did not forget it. It's a political.
I can go. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe. Fill us in, please.
Yeah, so I got tracking this one a couple of days ago when it started coming out. So we're obviously focused a lot, especially right now in regards to Ontario, for people in Ontario because of the election and everything else going on, as well as just the recent event in regards to Engler in Montreal, but also in non-Zionist world, we're also seeing the silencing going on here. So political web series was temporarily shut down, and I'm going to show the video here, which is actually from CTV News, where they actually break it down on how the breakdown was silenced.
Popular web series focused on Alberta politics has been temporarily shut down following complaints by a controversial medical supply company. A judge has ordered the breakdown to stop posting and to delete content following reporting on MH Care and its CEO, Sam Maraish. Tim Brooke has more on the ruling and on Maraish's connections to the provincial government.
Nate Pike and his Alberta politics web series, The Breakdown, is officially on pause.
Starting Tuesday evening, The Breakdown's social media will begin to be unpublished for what I hope will only be a short period of time.
Pike and his show were hit with 2 injunctions over the weekend, one to temporarily stop producing the show and another to delete old content. It comes after months of reporting on Sam Maraish and his company MH Care. That's the medical supplier the province paid for highly criticized PPE and children's medication. High-ranking members of the provincial government also came under scrutiny for joining Maraish at playoff hockey games.
I think it's absolutely important that people are aware of what's going on behind the curtains in the corridors of power.
MH Care is also the company named multiple times in last week's lawsuit filed by the former head of Alberta Health Services. But Maraish has yet to respond to any CTV News requests. In an affidavit, he claims the alleged conspiracy is demonstrably untrue and that the resulting campaign against him has caused him to be extremely fearful for his safety, his family's safety, and the safety of the employees and agents of MH Care. And so, after filing a $6 million lawsuit against The Breakdown, Maraish has asked for a 2-week court order. Political experts are puzzled.
I think the evidence is quite flimsy, and much of the evidence doesn't point actually to the breakdown.
Many big media outlets have also reported on the ties between MH Care, Maraish, and the UCP government. That's why many believe the breakdown is being targeted with a slap suit.
This happens when a well-funded individual or company using their large financial resources go after someone who is saying things that they want to silence, essentially, and they use their deep pockets.
Pike's lawyer filed an appeal Tuesday. He tells CTV News he'll be asking the court for an expedited hearing. Tim Brooke, CTV News, Calgary.
That's messed up. Like in Ontario, we have anti-slap suit legislation that makes it a little bit harder, but that doesn't mean it's not a possibility here or in other provinces. But that's clearly what it is. Like, what does slap suit stand for again? It's like, it's just an intimidation tactic, right?
It is. So it's SLAP stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. The entire idea of a SLAP suit is to intimidate you from participating. Much like we were discussing in regards to Eve Engler and how they're using injunctions, or also bail conditions to try to dissuade people from public participation. The alternative is also using lawsuits to try to intimidate people by just tying them up in the legal system. Because as you know, legal system is very much requires you to have resources, legal and financial, to pay said legal to counter these things. So we have anti-slap suits legislation in Ontario. I'm not sure if there's any in Alberta, just to make sure to protect people against these ridiculous suits. Because again, they're just to dissuade you from participating.
And you'll notice, like, the injunction comes without any much disclosure. Right? Like, you don't get to the bottom of whether or not what Nate Pike was saying is true or not. I mean, he's an investigative journalist. He likely made a calculated choice to make these claims. Like, right, he's got some receipts, one would imagine. But that's not something, whatever, I don't know the name of the idiot we're talking about on the other side. The rich guy filing this, that's not a threshold he has to meet at this point. He may have to with these lawsuits that he's facing, but I do love every time the media bring this up. They talk about what Nate was talking about. So now it's not just the breakdown that claimed it. And it wasn't just the breakdown that claimed it. Another one of the notes in the article, his lawyer mentions, like, he wasn't even the only person who reported on this. This was kind of common knowledge. And it's probably the nature of his show and him as an individual, being a little bit more anti-government, that made him a target. And the fact that he doesn't have the pocketbooks of the larger outlets that covered it. It was to, like, make an example out of Nate. And I mean,
That's exactly it. That's exactly what they want to do. It's the same thing and the same story you're seeing over and over. You're absolutely right. They're not going to be attacking the CTV because CTV is going to have lawyers that just to completely obstruct them. They're not going to attack Global or anything else. They are going to attack something significant, and the breakdown is a significant web series out in Alberta. But again, it's run by an individual, so he's going to they're going to be throwing on this $6 million lawsuit, which is probably gets thrown out once they realize there's no evidence to it. But they were still able to steamroll this thing in because was it Samriachi, that's his name, from Image Care, has a huge amount of resources behind him with a huge army of lawyers who could just plow this thing through and plow in the injunctions and plow everything else in, just to try to show to others, like, if you talk about me in a way that doesn't appeal to me, I will send in these lawsuits.
Yeah. And you'll never have their legal resources. It's really important. Like, we talk about how important it is, like, to get a lawyer and stuff, and it is, but you'll never have their legal resources because the whole point of a slap suit is that they have an overwhelming amount of resources that you don't have. So even if you have a little bit, whoever you get is going to be really overwhelmed. Like, make no mistake. What you need in these situations, and the situations like Eve's, are allies, like people who support you as human beings who can use their talents and whatever, protest and whatever to support you, and you need a lot of guts, a lot of bravery, because don't give, like, the judges and stuff are much more likely to see this for what it is than you might think when you're really scared. But you don't have their resources, and you know that they're everything. But it's like when people say at work, if there's something maybe not safe and no one speaks up about it, it's one of those things. Like, someone's got to bridge the gap so that the thing gets improved. That's all this is, and you gotta, like, speak up about it and be brave if it happens to you. But that's obviously easier said than done.
Yeah, and that, like, the ability to fight back will depend on the situation that you're in, kind of personally, beyond resources, right? The comment there that I've highlighted for folks to see from Carmen mentions that it wasn't just about threatening to sue the breakdown and going after, his facts and having to defend that, but the United Conservative Party, UKIP over in Alberta, was actively kind of going after his paramedic license, as a means to intimidate. And then it's starting to threaten the other half of your livelihood. Like, nobody really makes a buck off of progressive podcasts. We do it to keep we keep the lights on barely. And so he has a day job. He has a life that we all want to be brave, but, like, to what extent, right? How much of a price does our family pay? And it starts to play into it. So my hope is that he will be able to get enough resources. His GoFundMe is like $120,000 has been raised. Might be beyond that at this point. I did have, or I thought I had, there's the GoFundMe. I'll drop it in the comments. Whether you can get more details on the story, get updated, or you can help the legal fund. I mean, that's an impressive collection that he's put together so far. And the idea is that a lot of movement lawyers and motivated lawyers who take on cases like this, don't charge full price. So, there. Thank you, Joe.
No problem.
So, yeah, let's move on. What's next on our agenda? Oh, this is a good one. This is almost like a disruptive update, so it'll probably be the last headline, I think, until before we go into the actual disruptive updates, because it was born through that. So what was the date? Earlier this week, a historic agreement was signed between so-called Canada and the Haida Nation. And it was an agreement, but it didn't say anything all that new. What it was really just reaffirming what the treaties had already laid out, but which wasn't happening in practice. So it's in regards to the Haida Gwaii, which are a set of islands off the coast of British Columbia, like 100 kilometers off the coast. Thank you. There's a map. And it's like 200 islands where the Haida have been there since time immemorial. And in fact, Justin Trudeau says that in his quote, which I will share in a second. But it gives them self-determination and autonomy. And again, Justin Trudeau refers to what is going to be created as nation-to-nation relationships, which was what the treaties were always intended to be, right? Two nations kind of living side by side, but not interfering with one another, especially in a negative way. And the Haida have been trying to force the government to acknowledge the state of that treaty, and the state of ownership isn't the right word, the guardianship of that land, since 1913. So
they had things to do, there was so many things.
Well, one of my biggest worries, and I don't know, this doesn't seem to be that, but in Ontario and in Quebec and a lot of the East Coast, quite often land agreements are only signed when resource extraction is pending or needs a green light, because capital needs to know exactly who owns that land first, right? They're not going to go mine on disputed territory because you don't know what's going to happen. So quite often, if a resource company is concerned about a certain sect of land and there is a treaty agreement that has been pending, because they're always pending, they take years and years and years, as you can see, then it's kind of prioritized all of a sudden. But the intention here is to stop the logging that was happening, that was threatening the habitat, threatening the salmon, and it really hit a tipping point where the government knew that they had to act. Finally, right? Asking didn't really do anything. In 1985, they staged a logging blockade, a roadblock. We see this tactic still being utilized by Indigenous land defenders, and this went on for 3 months. What was it? There was like 72 arrests, and this is what kind of started the ball rolling and started a series of agreements that has led up to this particular agreement. But yeah, it's historic in that way, where you have the prime minister. Let me just read his quote and then I'll go to you. And I hate giving Trudeau any cred, but I think like on his way out, perhaps he is trying to give himself a bit of a clearer conscience. But he states that Canada does recognize that the Haida people have lived here since time immemorial, that the Haida people have an inalienable right to use, manage, and enjoy the lands of the Haida Gwaii as they see fit, that self-determination is the only path forward, or only path toward true reconciliation. And I mean, he uses a lot of key words. I know we talk about rhetoric, but when that's paired with signing the rights over, well, you never had the rights, but finally acknowledging that you have been illegally occupying the land is essentially what the agreement says. But I thought that gave a glimmer of hope. This story did please me. Chris, did you were going to pipe up?
Yeah, I thought you hit on a good point when you said about how they usually do these things before resource extraction is pending. So what did the government of Canada just do? Because I'm a lot less optimistic about this. They just got the Haida Nation to sign an agreement, which basically in Canada they go, we don't care about like the federal lands. We can get a publicity win out of this. However, you'll notice in the Haida Nation statement that even they say in their own statement that private property interests are protected. So now they're in a position where they're releasing a statement saying that although we're different federally, we still respect each other's private property rights. And I don't know the first thing about private property on the Haida Islands. I have no idea if like someone claims all the trees or something by or whatever. So it could be way different than I understand. But with that in mind, I know that the population is super dwindling. It seems to me like this is pretty performative. And also, I take a bit of a different stand because like the Acadian population over here, we didn't promote like a whole bunch of different ethno-states as like, oh, this will be the land for your group of people, and this will be the land for your group of people. Much like in Spanish America, the people here started to mix and like not in a, oh, we come and take all your wives things. It was like people actually mixed, mostly because Europe stayed out of the area for a couple hundred years. And I think the Canadian government, which is like a white colonial settler state, then drawing a whole bunch of borders that mostly it gets to decide what it is, saying, oh, your group of people is recognized as your group of people, and this is the area for your group of people, is not actually the left-wing multicultural policy that we think it is. I'm not saying that it isn't a win, but it is also it's something that a colonial state would do for sure. And when you look at those private property interests, you start to see what they get out of it.
Yeah, no, it's always like a time will tell, because in the statement that you're referencing there, they also explain that it's a transition period. So not only will it not affect property rights, but it won't affect municipal governance that is already there. And key point is that it won't halt the delivery of federal services. and that they describe it as a transition to reconcile jurisdiction. So there's likely lots of negotiation back and forth that's going to have to continue to happen. But also there is a committee, I forgot the name of it, but it is made up of representatives of the government, probably the BC government, maybe with some feds on it, and the Haida Nation. And they already kind of cooperatively take care of the land. Whether that's going well for them or not, kind of speaks to why they needed the agreement signed. So my guess is that it wasn't. But, whether this is just lip service or not is, we'll just have to wait and find out. But no matter what happens there, it came from not asking nicely, right? Like it came from having to escalate the situation to a point where folks needed to act. And even then still, it took decades. And guests are always reminding me that like a lot of the battles we fight are like they're long fights, and that always really frustrates me. It really does, because like everything just seems so imminent and urgent.
Yeah,
but
that's
these things kind of put that in perspective a bit.
The whole long fight thing is everyone who says that is wrong. There hasn't been a single revolution that happens with some like mass movement of we slowly change everyone's minds forever. You don't like it, I don't like it, but it's usually 12 people who know how to organize themselves, who pick the right day and are lucky and whatever. And it's a bit of chance, and it's a bit of people realizing what actually need. But this whole what we do is slow. Some things, yeah, and there are some benefits we've gained through taking time. There are a lot of people aware out there, but Canadian leftists are not on the path to victory right now. Make no mistake. We have to change our strategies or we'll lose.
It's so dark,
was the
but
optimist
yes.
here on the show?
No.
Yeah.
I think we can change our strategies and win.
Yeah.
Because I think people are defeatists. We can change our strategies and win, but if we don't, we're
stuck doing the same thing.
Any more headlines before we move on to the disruptive updates?
Nothing yet.
No. Okay. So, and always, if folks watching, you can enter comments on YouTube. We try to work them into the discussion. If there's something that we missed this week you think we should talk about, pop it in there and we'll see if we've got time for it. If it really enrages us, we always make time for it. So, but to the disruptive updates, we mentioned this last week, so I'm just going to quickly mention it again because we were early. We pulled the trigger a little too early. There's an economic blackout, for whatever folks think it's worth, because that came up in the discussion. On February, I want to say 24th, but my notes say 28th. Dang it. Let me just kind of look that up. Either way, there's an economic blackout happening, and the suggestion is like you don't buy anything on the February 28th. My notes are correct. Go figure. So don't buy anything. Don't go online. We actually have a Rabble Rants scheduled for that day, so I don't know. Either way, we told folks that we would share it, and we did. So it's just one of the many actions that happen strictly online. Not everybody can go in person and participate in all the ways that we talk about, but one of the victories to share, it's a victory, but it's kind of like a dark victory. You'll understand what I mean. There's a Tyee article here I'll try to share. A court ruled that the RCMP, particularly out in BC, the name of the unit is they've changed names. It was called the CRIG. It's notorious. You can find a lot of campaigns out there trying to defund this particular unit. They've changed the name to the CRUBC. I don't know if BC wants to share cred now, or they thought maybe it would make all those campaigns moot. But either way, it's a division of the RCMP, a unit is how it's described, and it is notorious. It is under investigation constantly by the civilian watchdog that is responsible for overseeing the RCMP. And yes, there's people charged with overseeing the RCMP, believe it or not. I don't know if they're doing a very good job, but the judge ruled that while they were arresting folks here in, I believe, 2021, land defenders, Indigenous land defenders, they were so explicitly racist, extremely serious and racist conduct is how the judge described it. And as a result, the charges, they were already convicted on charges of contempt, but their sentences might be reduced. And that is rare. That is rare that police conduct would be judged in that way so explicitly and have such a direct impact on the sentencing. It's I'm just going to stop sharing for a second because my notes are on the other side. So Joe, can you throw up that article if you could? It's linked in the Disruptive Updates, but just to go back to the incident. So this is on Wet'suwet'en land. These are land defenders we've talked about many times on the show, trying to protect Indigenous land from the work of Coastal GasLink. And back in 2020 or 2021, they were issued an injunction. Right? We were talking about civil injunctions where a corporation goes, hey, this demonstration, this act is eating into my profits, and asks a judge to stop it. And the judge did issue an injunction, and they were found guilty of being in contempt of a civil injunction. So they were never even criminal to begin with. So the fact that this was done all under the unit that is just now has been documented as being such a problem. But the one thing that bugs me about the ruling is that the judge had no problem with the conduct of police in terms of enforcement, even though they had snipers set up for when they were going to go in and arrest the people. Like it was planned execution of arrest warrants, and they put snipers in place, RCMP snipers. They had dogs. And so because all the records were revealed, they had contemplated, using the sniper to take out security cameras, using dogs to pull activists out of a building. And the language that they used to describe the Indigenous women was horrific. I won't repeat it. You might see it as Joe scrolls through the article here, but also laughed about the police brutality visited upon these Indigenous land defenders, the women in particular. And the judge, one of his comments, I view the conduct as extremely serious, involving racism directed towards Indigenous women. That is a group who have been systemically disadvantaged throughout virtually all sectors of the criminal justice system for generations. So this weighed heavily, I think, on the judge's decision to make such a big deal about this, right? Because this is not the first time police have been caught using racist language when arresting people. That's probably not even all that far from the norm. But it was so egregious and done under such circumstances that, and enough pressure. I mean, Amnesty International drew attention to this particular case. And so, thankfully, it's on record just how bad that particular unit is within the RCMP. So there's still a lot of work being done to defund this unit, because although they changed the name, they expanded its mandate, and it is tasked with monitoring protests, disruptions, Palestinian, Indigenous, although those are the same thing, just not for here. You understand what I'm saying? So this unit is its boundaries and our tolerance of it is being tested on Indigenous land defenders in BC for the most part. And this was at least a small pushback, I think, against it. What this ends up meaning for the Indigenous land defenders there, I don't know yet, but it was definitely worth mentioning.
I also want to point out that this is now the second week where we are talking about Amnesty International criticizing something in Canada.
Yes, it's a dark stain that you know, you end up being on all these campaigns for a global human rights organization. We like to think we're such an upstanding democracy, an example of what everything the United States isn't. And especially now, right? We're really marinating in our differences, but there isn't actually all that many. So folks, if you can ever, you know, donate to, I don't have the links for those folks, but there is a legal support fund for the wet sweats and land offenders. And that's one way you can take action on that one. But here, go ahead.
I got an inside scoop. Like I said, the police family. So some police know the RCMP is trash. Some police know the RCMP is trash. They've always been trash. If you know their history, they started out as a whole bunch of drunk people who lied about being able to ride horses, ran around through the woods for a few months. Like, they're a joke. Even if you're just a reformist, if you're not a revolutionary, first thing you do is just get rid of them completely. I don't care if you pay those people a pension for the rest of their life because they lost their government job, whatever, who cares? But just get rid of the institution. Most like police understand what the RCMP is. Like, local police forces vary wildly. It depends on local culture. It depends on lots of stuff. They're mostly garbage. But the RCMP, it is known, like, they are a colonial institution, and it's crazy they're still around. They're so 2 centuries ago. Like, it's weird that they exist.
One of the largest functions that they do, like ACAB, but the RCMP are the local police force in a lot of rural parts of Canada where there is no local police force or even the provincial police force doesn't operate there. So, side story, NDP conventions. I don't know how they always come up, but one of the motions that was considered at the last convention that, you know, had a lot of buzz around it was defund the RCMP. And leading up to convention, you know, you meet with your local group, you decide, do you want to endorse this and send it to convention? Do you want to promote it as a motion, as a resolution? And you have a bit of a debate. Sometimes, you know, like if it's like for free healthcare, I was like, yes. But this one generated a lot of debate, even in my local riding, where I would consider us all socialists, for the most part, but definitely progressives. And the generational gap on this question was unreal. Like, it was a pearl clutching moment inside an environment where we had talked about police brutality and the murdered and missing Indigenous women and all of the issues that go on with the historical purpose of the RCMP and everything, the costs that we spend on these fucking cops. And no, it was like the phrases that were coming out of an older generation, white settlers, was like, what will all these towns do without the RCMP? It was like they anticipated everything falling into chaos and there would be no way for these towns. Like, there was no other solution. And it was coming from some people who had actually engaged in abolitionist discussions without having this reaction. But, you know, I wasn't even able to pass that within my own little riding association. And like, I thought we were good. We put some radical shit up and put it to convention, but that one was a stickler. So lots of work to do in our, even like the progressive community, to talk about defunding police. Because like all the stories that we've talked about today, can you imagine if we could tally the cost of harassing and arresting all of these people, or trying to silence all of these people, even if we added up the police costs, the legal costs, and all of that? It's incredible what we could do for our communities if we weren't spending it on this. Like, just this alone, like just like Palestinian and Indigenous resistance. And then
call back to the election. I think Mike Schreier actually broke down how much it costs to incarcerate a person than just give them basic needs, like you know, whether it be UBI or everything else. So there are numbers out there that we can even start, you know, taking a look at it, because you're absolutely right. the amount of money we spend in regards to policing, whether it be investigation or incarceration of people or everything else, it is huge. And half the time, it is cruel and unnecessary. And yeah.
If Canada had civil unrest, we'd be in a really interesting moral quandary, because we've got to the point where imprisoning people and feeding them and clothing them and stuff seems really weird given the deal that most citizens are left with, where they have to work 2 jobs to barely do that on their own. And I'm not joking, not to say that prison isn't prison, but it means that more of society is likely to be in favor of things like the death penalty, or that the court or other things like that will like these extrajudicial things like is happening to Eves will happen, because society's not going to be willing to act through our legal system the way that they currently act. It's a really big issue. Europe has a huge amount of problems with extrajudicial legal stuff. Very like strong democracies that we think of as strong democracies, you don't hear this stuff in the news across a continent or countries away. So you think it's the strongest democracy in the world. If you've seen someone from Europe come to here in Canada and see our homelessness, you see what people realize when their perceptions about a country are completely turned on its head. This extrajudicial stuff hasn't, like, it's coming to Canada now. It's very common in other places in the world because they have thousands of years of history of this happening, and the state knows they can get away with it. The state is scared in Canada, but the police aren't scared. Not a bit.
Not yet. Not yet. Let's go to another disruptive update. This one is it's global. It originated out of the United States, but you too can participate. And here's, we'll just add this up here. Folks can know exactly what I'm talking about. And I have a special banner for this. So, folks have been fucking up Teslas all across the United States and maybe beyond. I've seen some stars selling their Tesla and donating the money to charity. But the point is, there's people initiating actions against Tesla. And, by proxy, Elon Musk is the target in question. And I think this is just like cathartic. I'm not sure hitting them at the pocketbooks is always a good plan, right? But I'm not sure if this will really intimidate Elon into stopping doing what he's doing. But nonetheless, this is what folks are up to. So they're encouraging people, if you own stock, a little bourgeois kind of participation. If you own stock, dump it. If you own a Tesla, sell it. But also, people are showing up at showrooms and holding protests. There's the article there kind of gives you a rundown of a couple of the actions that have already happened. But the folks that are doing this have made it possible for you to replicate yourself. And I love this kind of initiative where grassroots kind of make it easy for you to rinse and repeat. So if you go to TeslaTakedown.com, maybe I should just pop that one up too, but you can follow the steps to initiate your own. So here it is here. And so someone's gone through the trouble of creating a website, and you can either find one near you or start one. A lot of organizations do this for a day of action. The big cities automatically kind of have one, but then you encourage people to find a couple friends and do it yourself and replicate this. So they've made it easy. This would be something for other people to think about replicating for your own kind of local initiatives to branch them out. But hurting Tesla is stopping Musk is their kind of theory of change here, and save our democracy. I'm not sure how I feel about those slogans, but I'm happy to encourage people to show their discontent with that man. He's a fucking Nazi, and it's incredible the consolidation of power that's happening in the United States right now. I mean, it's too late in the show for us to open that up as a discussion point. But surely, yeah. What do you guys think when you see a Tesla on the street now? It's like, I feel like it's like watching a Canadian flag go down, like a pickup truck with a big Canadian flag and the Cybertruck. They're like all one in the same vehicle to me now. Are you both on mute?
Sorry. Probably works better if I get myself off mute. I haven't seen any so far in my city. I don't know if there is any. But I'm more than likely to just be looking at going, all right, any minute now, thing's probably going to catch fire on its own. And which, to me, so represents everything about Elon Musk, the U.S. government, and the fact that it's just ready to explode on fire on its own. Because, so
he's known as like a bullshitter in the tech and auto world beforehand. It's really interesting, like all this stuff that's happening now, because like if you just kind of paid attention to that stuff offhand, like financial news or whatever, he constantly makes these like outrageous commitments or promises that he doesn't uphold to. And it's turned out to actually be quite the wise investment decision, because the gains you gain from that, like from people investing in the social media world, seems to be more than the losses when people find out that you were just full of shit. We'll see if that translates to what he's doing on the world stage now. I think he likes the sound of his own voice, and I think there's a lot of stuff that we think is happening that isn't happening. Like, the United States is a fascist state. They've been a fascist state. Now they're taken over by what? More openly fascist people? It's more jarring to people who don't recognize that they've historically been this for a while anyway. Their policies likely are just going to be more, they can do the flamboyant ones, which is scary. But
yeah, I've heard the argument made that, the economic conditions don't quite exist for fascism yet, but I'm with you. Like, calling it what their goal is one and the same, with the fact that they just haven't kind of gotten to that point yet. It doesn't seem like we have to hold our tongue until then. It's it's not worth it.
State-sponsored monopoly police states. I don't know. I could make the other argument, but they're not a free market economy. That's for sure.
No, considering the tech oligarchs were the honored guests at the inauguration of a president, kind of tells you exactly what you're saying. And yeah, we may not be fully within the fascist state yet, but it's kind of hard not to see that we're heading towards it. And we have better reference points than we did before. I mean, the first time that they saw the mustache guy coming into power, they never seen anything like that before. Now, we've got better information. We've got a history.
I mean, there's still, to an extent, a democracy, but I exclude that from being a fascist state. Like, you can have different forms of fascist states, and they're way closer to a fascist state than they are what they claim to be. That's for sure.
They can still be a democracy, but if you're watching what they're doing right now, I mean, they've already started works in regards to limiting vote. When is it? The SAVE Act is the latest one that came in, where your identification needs to reflect your birth certificate, and if it doesn't, then you're gonna have problems registering. This could completely disenfranchise women that got married and changed their last names, as well as possibly in regards to immigration or any other kind of changes, as well as trans individuals and so on and so forth. They're already working, so you could have the fascism and totalitarian, still have a democracy, but they're just removing the people they don't want voting for them and finding ways of doing that. I mean, they've been doing it with gerrymandering and everything else. Now they've got it a bit, they're trying to make it even bigger.
Joe, do you want to tell us about the Sam Hirsch post? I'll post it up about the action in Ottawa, because we're talking about trans rights and whatnot.
I've got the post right here.
Oh, you're just quick draw McGraw.
I am.
I was trying to up you on that one, but go ahead. I love to see Sam Hirsch. We've had him on the show before, an excellent activist in Ottawa. Make sure you're following him on socials if you want to stay updated there.
Absolutely. I've met him quite a few times at different events. He's a very nice guy, very, very friendly and open. Um, and this particular one is he was I don't believe he was involved in this one, but he's just reporting and reflecting. So I even got the message about this from Community Solidarity Ottawa, where they were already planning the protest, and they did do the protest in regards to this particular movie. Now the movie is titled Adult Human Female, and
Ugh.
right as Jessa's a response there, you can tell by the title exactly what kind of movie this is going to
Well,
be.
the fact that J.K. Rowling's chiming in here.
Oh, absolutely. She's.
Do you have the same post up? Yeah.
Yeah, she's very much. She's just thinking about the women. So obviously, this is a massively transphobic film, and which is surprising to many of us in Ottawa, because Ottawa Public Library has a very specific list as to what they permit and do not permit, and this should have been excluded from being permitted at the Ottawa Public Library. Now, there was a great showing that showed up, as you guys can see in the photo here, that came in and tried to block the start of the movie, and they were effective for a while. I do believe the police did eventually clear them out, and the movie did still play. But this still, to me, reads as to why the hell did the Ottawa Public Library actually permit this film to go through? This should have never occurred, and I think this needs to be brought up to both to the board at the Ottawa Public Library, as well as to City Council, as to this goes against the rules of the of Ottawa Public Library. How did this get in there?
Are your library workers unionized? Most of them across Ontario are.
I don't know. I'd have to check.
And I don't like shitting on the labor movement at all, but like it's sometimes things like this, like where they clear encampments or battles like this have to happen when there's already unionized employees in place that could just shut it the fuck down. We've talked about you need to radicalize and militarize to a degree, or more militant labor movement who would not flinch at doing this. If I worked at that library and I knew my union had my back, I wouldn't open the fucking doors, like regardless of what some panel said. But stuff like this is a reminder that policies and police don't keep us safe. If you want something shut down, you can't lean on stuff like that. You got to come out in numbers and shut it down. And in reality, the most effective thing in shutting down the convoy was community resistance. It doesn't look good on them when all of the people they say they're trying to save, Canadians, come up and face off with you and tell you to get the fuck out of your neighborhood, that you don't represent them, and they come out in numbers that are greater than yours. Like, that's better than any police line anyway, right? Not for images, for morale boosting within your community, and to just like silence their message. But yeah, police are always going to be siding with the fucking fash on this one. You can tell by which way they stand, who they're protecting usually. But kudos to Ottawa community. They regularly show up in numbers like this and in acts of defiance, and that stuff is so critical. I have, did you have more to say on that, Joe?
No, that's pretty much it. So they went in, they disrupted, and they did as best as possible. They even got the attention of Rowling. So obviously, if you're pissing her off, you're doing something good.
So the intention of the sorts of people who push the anti-trans stuff are to keep people talking about that and to make as many people mad about trans stuff as possible. That's what it is. In marketing, in the marketing world, which is where my degree is, we know that over 80% of posts about trans stuff are on the conservative wing. Left-wingers talk about it. We're in left-wing circles. We know it's talked about a lot, but 80%, like a few years ago, that's what it was. I can think of a handful of ways where you can make life really difficult for the types of people who are going to try and put these things on at a public library. Not a lot of them I'm going to say on a podcast. It is pretty difficult to get public libraries, which are supported by the state, to go the way you want without a lot of community support. That, yeah, you might be able to get a petition, but like, this is why, like, in the past, when things have got really bad in societies, people have had to go outside of the law. It's not because it's the right thing to do legally. It's because it's the right thing to do ethically, because you can't protect people otherwise. Who knows what that looks like in Canada in 5 or 10 years, and where people draw lines, or like if we need to like create whole new legal codes or whatever. But we can see where it's failing us. Like we can't only operate within the system that they've designed. It's a huge, yeah.
Oh yeah, if they've put a pathway there, it's probably because it's a futile one. All right, we have to create our own. One more last disruptive update before our activist tip of the week, or tips. So more of a collection of tips this week. It's kind of, this is just for folks in Toronto to go to, but the idea of it, in the chat, I've put the address there. Oh, YouTube doesn't like my comment because it has an address in it, I guess. Okay. So at Peminar in Toronto, it's like a cafe bar, it's a little tiny thing, very cute. At 307 Augusta Avenue, they're holding an art exhibit called Framing Resistance. And it is a collection of photographs from the Palestinian Solidarity Movement in the past year and a half. And I don't know if all, but many of the photographs there are from Joshua Best. And we had him on for one of our episodes about photographing the front lines. And it's an incredible episode to hear, what Joshua feels like his mission is. He gives tips to folks who are trying to document the police and to document the movements. If you must find him on Instagram, because he puts all of his beautifully stunning photographs up there. They're so powerful, right? Not only does he photograph the police brutality, that's really a small part of it. It's the moments of resistance, right? The personal portraits that he takes of people in the fight are incredible. I get goosebumps thinking about them. We bought the rights to one of his photographs for our episode, Blockades and Bail Conditions, because I just fell in love with the photograph and no other cover art would do. I thought it just summed up the entire event and the discussion. And you must support artists like this. I would consider him a journalist to a degree, right? Because he documents these things, and on his Instagram posts, he'll often give you an account of what happened. And some commentary, an ally for sure. You see him being interviewed for the piece that Joe has up there. And if you're in Toronto, you will have seen him on the front lines many, many, many times. So just the idea of celebrating resistance, that we can take time to celebrate and create cultural spaces and social spaces in these moments, even though we feel like we are going full press and there's no time to spare. But these moments are important. Getting joy still is important. I normally don't promote events that don't describe being either mask mandatory or encouraged, but it is a small gallery. I encourage, if you are going there, wear a mask. It's not often that populated, and it's on till February 28th. So it's not a one-day event, but it's a small space, and I see more and more people through community land trusts. I saw the other day in Toronto, securing more and more spaces to cultivate the arts in this way. And when we tie the arts with resistance, as it should be, I thought that was a really beautiful thing that they're doing in Toronto. So if you can't catch the exhibit, you don't have to travel to Toronto to see Joshua Best's work. He has a website, but following him on Instagram will really help you keep up to date on the movement in Toronto as well. It's kind of an added bonus. So I almost gush when I talk about Joshua, because his work is just absolutely stunning. So yeah, check that out for sure. So anybody else have any disruptive updates before I move on to our last segment, which is activist tips? And I have a scrap piece of paper on here with them.
All right, with regards to art is dead right now, and if we ever succeed, no, listen, you're gonna love this. If we, the more we succeed revolutionary, the more stuff like that, like real art, actually comes out. That's in current society. How many artists, writers, people who it should be easier to be a journalist today because of technology. But how many of these people are stuck doing dead-end jobs? So art, compared to our capacity as a society, is destroyed. And so it's people like this who are really coming out and showing that they know what they're doing. But if you like the arts, this is why a lot of artists are leftists. You get more art if people have more free time, if people are more culturally aware, things like that.
Absolutely, but art is not dead, Chris. It's been suppressed. Can we say that? Can we land on that? Yeah, so as always, if you have disruptive updates that you'd like us to share, you can email them to bpofdisruption@gmail.com. Yes, we're still on Gmail. Or through our social media, because that's mostly where I find a lot of these updates anyway. And every victory, every action is worth sharing, big or small. Just send them our way. But on to the activist tips. Wait, Joe, no, I already asked you, right? You don't have a disruptive update that I'm missing?
Oh, no, we already
Glossing
did mine.
over. Okay, good. Okay.
Good.
So, activist tip regarding cell phones at protests. So we've talked about taking photographs at protests before and whether or not to take people's faces and blast them out there. That's kind of a discussion that is not so clear cut, but generally, don't be broadcasting live protests that are happening and showing the faces of protesters. But this is kind of just you and your cell phone when you're going to a direct action. So that could be a protest, that could be a march, that could be a, community picket line. I don't know if you want to deploy this on regular picket lines. Surely anything that you might anticipate having problems with authorities at. And like I said, that could be completely legal. We don't know these days. So it's sometimes better to be safe than sorry. That being said, like the level of your intended participation might influence how far you go with some of these tips. So most of them center around not being tracked by police while you're at a protest. So I'll go through a litany of things that you can do. But in order not to be tracked, turn off your location devices. So you can do that as a whole. You can go on airplane mode, or you can kind of be selective about the apps that you're using to turn off the location devices. Again, it's kind of like depending on how careful you want to be, there's degrees to which you can kind of implement this. But you can also just turn your phone off. But the reality is, especially if you're organizing, a lot of us rely on apps, which, like, side tip, use runners when you have a large action rather than having to have people on their phones all the time and then all of that information then saved digitally, even if you're using these apps. It's like, plus people have their head down when they're on their phone. So if you use runners, like people intend that their only job is to relay information around the area, that's ideal, because police will use techniques called geofencing. It's a way, I'm not very technically inclined, but they create like an area they get to design, and it can track signals going in and out of that area. They can also do other things, but one of the ways you can avoid that is by just like turning your phone off, turning all the location devices off. That makes also unintended data transfer impossible, or nearly impossible. I don't know if anything's impossible technically anymore, but you also might want to turn off your Face ID. That's the app that will open your phone because you show your face or use your fingerprint. The reason you do this is if you're arrested. So we did talk about things to do when you're arrested. This is things you do before you're arrested in anticipation of being arrested. This is so police can't get into your phone, or they would require a court order to get into your phone. It just makes it harder. Nothing makes it impossible. It just makes it harder. We try to make the police's job as hard as possible. So turn off the Face ID and the fingerprint ID. Just a passcode will open it. Consider, if you're organizing, especially, and some of your plans may be on your phone within your devices, back up your phone before you go out to an action so that if you need to wipe it, completely wipe your phone, you can do that a little more confidently, that you've backed it up right beforehand. Your backup will still be around, but not on you, on your phone, right? Because all your contacts are on your phone, all your messages are on the phone. And that's another thing, is to manage your notifications when you go out. So let's say you've decided to keep it on because you need to be in contact with your comrades. You don't want your phone, even if it's locked, sitting there with the cops and all your messages are popping up, the names of your colleagues, and they're looking for you and they're asking questions, or perhaps revealing information or revealing themselves to be connected with you and the action. So turn off your notifications, or just have the ones that will be coming from folks who know to be a little more savvy within their messaging. Again, you and your comrades and your needs, so you adjust accordingly. But you can also encrypt your entire phone. There's lots of websites. I'm not going to walk you through the steps like that. You just Google how do I encrypt my phone and follow the steps there. So, I know a lot of you I'm just going to hold up a sign. What is the deal? But what if you guys decide to take the street, right?
There's one additional solution that you didn't mention, which is don't use your main phone. If you can
a burner
get
phone.
A second
it was
phone,
in my notes. I missed it. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. If you can
No.
If you can have if you have the resources or the means to get a second phone, and it doesn't need to be the fantastic phone. It could be a couple generations older. If you can get one of those, and it could be just something as simple as a SIM swap, or if you have another SIM for it, that's fine too. And just keep that phone to be bare minimum for while you're at the actions. You can maybe throw on whatever messaging app that you need to do for that particular event. Turn off notifications for it, so you'll be manually checking, so you need to do anything. And if you need to at any particular point, you can either get an app in there that's ready for it, but you can wipe it right away. And that's it. You don't need to worry about your main phone, because that'll be safely at home, which would still be requiring any sort of legal, they'll have to get a lot more. They'll need to get a lot more things to be able to try to get access to it if you don't have it with you. So
yeah. And with this, using a burner phone, or perhaps wiping your phone or turning it off, your phone will most likely be confiscated when you're arrested. So make sure we've said this before, but write down the numbers, your emergency contacts. So someone who can trigger legal support, right? Make sure someone at home or your bestie knows you're going to a protest, and here's who to call in case I get arrested, or, you don't hear from me. Ideally, as organizers, you are already preparing for that, watching to see if anyone gets arrested, initiating legal support. Maybe that will be next week's tip, how to do the best form of jail support once people are arrested, kind of as an organization. But yeah, this is just tips. Again, not anticipating that folks will go out and break the law, but, evidenced by the endless episodes that we've done on Blueprints of Disruption, on police actions, and even just today, this week, looking at the arrests of people for calling other people online fascists and genocide supporters. So I don't think we can no longer live in the state where I don't break the law, I'm okay. I don't have to worry about how long the sentences are for Pat King because I don't break the law. You don't even know that anymore. When you have charges like mischief and disruption, so vague terms, that exist, it's quite common. You absolutely can be charged without anticipating it. So remember, when you're planning your actions in particular, that you keep that in mind, that your phones will be confiscated. And there's a bunch of steps that you can take to make it a little bit harder for cops, especially to find your comrades, right? And kind of, you may not worry about getting arrested or staying in jail, really defiant, but your comrades might. They might have a lot more to lose. So by keeping yourself safe, you also keep your whole community safer. And if you're ever on our catalog, which you should be, it's extensive. It's 172 episodes now of Blueprints of Disruption, so ways that you can disrupt. And our very first episode is called We Keep Us Safe. It's with Noodles, who's an OPSEC specialist in Toronto, an activist that, obviously that's not their real name, right? They hid their name. They take great steps to maintain their anonymity for this reason, but it's a great episode to not just hear tips on how, as organizers, you can digitally keep people safe and just structurally design yourself to keep yourself safer, but the reasons why, right? The justification and the environment that you create when everybody knows you're taking steps to keep each other safe, right? Whether or not you ever need to actually implement these or not. So that's it, folks. That was Rabble Rants for Friday, February 21st. A lot of stuff that we unpacked, and we'll do it again next week. Always make sure you check out the Blueprints of Disruption episodes. They are available here on YouTube if that's where you're watching, but they're also available on any of the podcast catchers. It's just interviews with activists, organizers, lawyers, journalists, all talking about how to make movements more effective, how to organize towards the revolution that we talk about a lot, and really the how to get there. So, you know, Chris said, we've got so far to go and, you know, we're not there. And that is true, but there's so many people that are, you know, that are doing the exact work. And if we can just blow that up, scale it up as far as possible.
There's a lot of people who are
there.
activated. There's a lot of people who are activated. There's more socialists in Canada than there ever have been before. My point is always about the tactics and strategies we use. Oftentimes we're running, it's what you said stuck with me, is running down the path they put for you. There's a lot of times when people don't realize they're doing that. I mean, I did it when I became interim leader of the New Brunswick NDP. That was a waste of time, but that's how you learn things too. So
that is true. Just to also promo the episode that went up this week, it was an interview with, I'm drawing a blank. Oh my gosh. It was with the Toronto Palestinian families and Toronto Jewish families. And we talked about their case in last week's Rabble Rants. The Toronto District School Board adopted a really problematic report. So I got to talk to the people who have been organizing against anti-Palestinian racism in that school board since 2021. So back when Desmond Cole was doxxed because he spoke up for Palestine at some TDSB meeting, and they were just like, no, fuck that. Not again. I started organizing, you know, then October 7th happened and they really had to scale up their work and gear it up. So talking to them about how you create communities within hostile environments, right? And school boards are a contested battleground now, and they, you know, vet new members. They take some precautions in creating their community, but in the end, it feels like a more genuine, safer place to organize. So I encourage folks to listen to that. And next week, as long as something doesn't blow up, you'll hear Chris again. He'll be on talking about controlled opposition, the NDP, and what a controlled opposition is to us by definition and whatnot. It's an interesting discussion. We go on tangents as we always do, but make sure you check that out. They drop every Tuesday, anywhere you can catch your podcasts. Thank you, gentlemen. I hope you enjoy your Friday. Yes,
Always
until next time.
Hey, take care.
United, we'll never be defeated. The people